Welcome to another episode of the Thrive in China podcast. In today's episode, we've got Jimmy Robinson coming on, who is co-founder of PingPong Digital. Jimmy has shared his journey from heading off from university to Beijing, experiencing China on the ground, to heading back then to the UK and founding PingPong Digital with two other partners. PingPong Digital has grown in the last 10 years, been extremely successful, but it doesn't mean that Jimmy hasn't hit certain pain points along his journey. Take a listen to today's podcast. Enjoy. I want to welcome everybody to the Thrive in China podcast. Today, I've got an extremely exciting guest, Jimmy Robinson, who's right now in New York. So we are recording this at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it is going to be a bit of a coffee chat
It will
on
be.
how Jimmy has thrived in China and survived the US. But I usually don't want to introduce my guests because I always think my guests can introduce themselves a hell of a lot better than I can. So Jimmy, why don't you go ahead and introduce a little bit of where you're from, your background, and ultimately, how did you end up in China originally?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction there, or the gateway to the introduction. So my name is Jimmy Robinson. I am co-founder and CEO for PingPong Digital. PingPong Digital is a full-service Chinese digital marketing agency. So anything in the world of digital, and China is pretty much what we are experts in. And of course, I often get asked the question, well, how on earth have you ended up heading a Chinese digital marketing agency?
And
So
if you haven't guessed, Jimmy's British. So those of you that are
yes.
listening on the podcast, it's very courtesy.
Indeed. Feel free to Google me afterwards. You can go and find me on LinkedIn or something. So my journey, I guess, began I don't know how far back I'll go, but I'll try and do it in a nutshell. So my journey, I guess, in the China realm of things began at university when I was applying for jobs. I was applying for different courses, seeing what my options were at uni. I was super interested in business and management, so I kind of wanted to go down that route. And it was my dad who said, oh, you should pick a language as well. You can't just do one thing here. You can't just do a management degree. He said, so many people are going to graduate with a management degree. You need to give yourself some other kind of competitive edge. So went to all the open days, explored all the different kind of options when it came to languages, and I landed on the Chinese language, which ended up being a great decision. So ended up doing that at the university level. After I graduated, I think the same thing with most graduates. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I attended a bunch of different like careers fairs, networking events, things of that nature. And I ended up chatting to this one guy there who was a headhunter. So he was in recruitment. I wish I could remember his name, but for the life of me, I can't. And he recommended to me to go into recruitment and headhunting. His advice there was headhunting. One, it gave me a few really good bits of advice. One, it gives you a crash course into the world of actual business. So if you're in headhunting and recruitment, you get a crash course in how to conduct yourself in many different kinds of business situations. Secondly, you get X-ray vision. You get an inside look into how companies work and operate. And thirdly, you get to have or build, I should say, a ton of great connections.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it made great sense. Yes, okay, I will, submit my application for a headhunting firm in that case. Did that, got interviewed, applied for a job in London, got interviewed in London, and got offered the job, what I thought would be in London. And when they called me up, they were like, okay, we want to offer you the job, but we actually want you to work in our office in Beijing. Are you okay with that? And I was like, well, I guess I applied for London, but sure, why not? Like an adventure. Obviously, because of my background, I guess learning Chinese at university, they saw an opportunity there. So went out and started working in Beijing in headhunting, did that for 6 months, realized I hated it, as most people do, I think, in that world. I would not change a single thing though. I would still do it all over again, and I would recommend it to people as well. I do recommend that as a career option for people who have no idea what they want to do, because the skills that I learned from this still serve me well today. And after that for 6 months, yeah, hated it. And my manager, he at the time was basically saying, I think you should, explore the world of digital marketing. So why don't you go and do that instead? And in very China fashion, kind of sent a text message to somebody and then said, yeah, so you're starting working in an advertising agency next week. It's done, it's sorted. I was like, oh, okay.
But that's the advantage of working for a recruitment funny. They recruited you for another job.
Ironically enough, yes. And like I said, it's a great job. Like you build great connections and a
Yeah.
great network of people as well. And even now I've still got a bunch of headhunter friends, which does come in quite handy. I don't need them right now, but
You never know when you might.
you never know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I ended up moving over to the world of advertising, but it was advertising in China. So my whole speciality, I guess, was built around working with Western-based businesses and then helping them localize and adapt and understand the China
The
market.
advertising you were doing in those days, was it tradition? I mean, I don't know what year we're talking about now, but was it traditional, or was it a period where there was the start of the transition to the digital world, or what was the start like for advertising?
Sure, it's a good question as well, because I was, ironically enough, one of the first people to like sign up for WeChat. I was a super
Oh,
early adopter of WeChat, something that I'm still very proud of. And WeChat, we were using that even in the headhunting firm. So in the headhunting firm, we were using WeChat. So when we entered, when I started to enter into the world of advertising, it still was a very big thing, and it was an important part of any campaign that we were
mm,
running and executing for our clients. But there was still a lot of offline stuff as well,
mm.
so it was quite a
A
mix.
mix,
Whereas
yeah,
now I just specialize in digital,
right,
so that's the big difference, I guess.
right. And what brought you, or how did ping pong develop? I mean, how did those relationships come about?
For sure, yeah, yeah. The next chapter, I
The
guess,
next,
right?
yeah, exactly.
So that kind of happened when the agency that I was working for was kind of going through a merger and acquisition process. So essentially, they were kind of like selling the brand name to like a local Chinese agency
Okay,
where none of the existing infrastructure was going to be taken over
okay,
or transferred to the new entity. They just wanted the name to slap it kind of on the door.
okay.
So at that point, me and everybody else were kind of made just redundant. I got offered to be relocated to Australia or Singapore. And well, I just thought to myself at that time, well, if I'm going to be going to an English speaking country, I may as well just go back to my English
Right.
speaking country. So I made the decision at that point to head back to the UK, and I loved advertising. I loved that idea of like creating something.
Mm,
I can always remember one time when I was in the back of a taxi cab in Shanghai, and an ad campaign that I'd been working on and had been arguing with some of the creatives about where the placement of certain things should be, because I knew what my client was going to want,
mm,
because I was on the accounts service team, so I was
right.
client services. I knew what my client wanted, and I made sure that I got what my client wanted
Mm.
in this ad campaign. And I always just remember being sat in the back of a taxi cab, seeing the ad campaign on the back of the seat, and thinking to myself,
Paper print or on the video?
oh, on the video
On the
screens,
video
yeah,
screen.
the little
So
video
I think people
screen.
need to be aware of that.
Oh yes,
In taxis in China, I think they were one of the first to develop it. On the back seat of the front passenger seat, there were TVs, ultimately
yeah.
rolling ad campaigns. Yeah, that was my entertainment when I was driving to the office every morning. Was what I
I
had to
know
myself up.
it's super entertaining. Actually, they were
Very
great.
entertaining. Yeah.
It's funny because you have them in like New
It's what
York
actually
now.
forces you to sit in the back because that's the
Oh yeah,
entertainment you're getting.
yeah, for sure. It makes the journey go by quite quickly as well, I have to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, and yeah, so I remember seeing that and thinking to myself, I knew that font should have been where I said it was. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, I'm so happy that I fought, at
Right.
3 a.m. in
Right.
Chinese with the creatives to get this placement exactly where I thought it and knew it should be. And then seeing that ad campaign on these tiny little TV screens, and
Yeah.
yes, I knew I was right. And I got a great deal of gratification and satisfaction from
Mm,
seeing something that I'd worked on now kind of in the real world.
right.
It,
Coming into
it wasn't
fruition, right? It's tangible.
exactly, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's something that I can, actually I can take a picture of it, put that on my, Instagram and say, I did this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then so that was such a lovely feeling. So I wanted to continue in the world of advertising. So I remember interviewing around a lot when I got back to the UK. My title and job in China was account manager. So I was heading up these nationwide campaigns in China, which were, very, very complicated because I don't think a lot of people realize that, China geographically is the size of Europe, like
Mm,
continental Europe. It's
mm,
huge. And so, when you're trying to manage these campaigns logistically around all of these different provinces in China, it's very complicated.
mm.
Um, so when I went back to the UK, I thought, my gosh, with all of this experience, people are going to snap me up. And that was not the case at all.
Why
I
do you think that is?
Well, I mean, they kind of told me. I was applying for jobs, even at the firm that I'd been working at. And when I went and like met with them and interviewed with them, they were like, "Oh, okay, yeah. So based on your experience, we feel as though we'll start you out at an internship and then see how we get on from there." And I remember just
But
thinking to myself,
why? Why?
I think it was mainly because so at this point I'd had a year and a half's worth of experience in the world of advertising, and they kind of said that in order for me to be an account manager level or even a junior account manager level, I would need at least 5 years worth of work experience to
So
qualify for
this
that.
is something, Jimmy, I think this is something great to touch on because I have had many friends go through this. And I don't think people realize this. As a foreigner living, residing, working in China, your job responsibility becomes, regardless of title, becomes so much greater
Yeah.
because everybody is reliant on you, especially when you work for a Western company.
Yes.
You become the spy, you become the confidant, you become the person that suddenly you're hired for account management, but suddenly you're dealing with finance and other aspects of the business because the guys overseas trust you and
Yeah.
they feel like they can rely on you. And so the beauty of it is that you actually get an experience much broader than you anticipated, and you learn by doing. You're forced actually to learn by doing.
Yeah.
Many of us, when I arrived in 2003, I didn't have a mentor, I didn't have a boss, I didn't have a coach showing me the ways of doing business in China. I was kind of left to my own, figuring it out. And of course, I made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and we learn from our mistakes. And you're kind of forced to learn faster, I guess, in
Yeah.
China than elsewhere. But I have a lot of friends who obviously left China for a variety of different reasons and were demoted in their home jurisdictions, but actually having had the experience of 20 people in their team,
Yeah.
but nobody believing it, right?
Yes.
It's
And
so hard for a lot of foreigners, expats, to acclimatize back home after having had that I don't know, that wealth of experience.
for sure. And
Yeah,
it's one of those frustrating things, I guess, when you return back to your home market and everything that you've done, I guess in China is not necessarily seen or appreciated in the way that, it really kind of should be actually,
yeah.
because
You're
the way that
homegrown.
yes. the skills that you acquire from
In
this, it's
18 months
just
compared to the 5 years in the UK is totally different, right?
100%.
Yeah.
The fact that you're again having to learn an entire new culture, new way of doing business in a foreign language,
Mm,
no less. It's the analogy I always use is that in China they push you into the deep end and you either sink or you swim,
absolutely. Yeah.
and that's it. And if they think that you can swim, they will push you into the deep end of the pool.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
and I value that though, because it means that they recognize and value skill sets over experience.
Yes.
Now, experience is still very important, and I'm not going to downplay experience. I understand why sometimes people will value experience a little bit more. But the skill set of being able to pick up something very quickly and being able to execute on that to a
Mm.
high level is also something that I don't think a lot of people pay much attention to in the
And I think
West.
it's something that's so vital, especially if you're in a startup phase,
For
right?
sure.
Uh,
Exactly.
right? If you're
Um,
in the startup phase of your business, you need that speed, you need that tenacity, that grit to push forward, right?
Absolutely, just
And
to
I think that
persevere.
the at least what my experience has taught me working in China is I don't have fear, which is not a great thing sometimes, but I'm just like, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna see, and then well, if I fail, I fail it, but if I succeed, fantastic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's
Um,
no harm in trying.
exactly. So I mean, you were basically rejected.
I was rejected by everybody,
And
but
and
to a
then how
certain
did you
extent.
find your partners?
Well, so I was kind of in a for want of a better term, a flip the bird kind of phase at that point where I was just so angry and frustrated at and almost insulted on some level that they
Sure.
thought that I qualified to make them coffee when I just ran a nationwide campaign in China for one of the
Right.
largest automobile companies in the world, and I was like, this.
Yeah.
I don't understand this. So I when I returned back, I did have mild reverse culture shock. I didn't understand why we can't just shout the waiter over. I kind of missed those things. It was just so efficient. When you want to call for the check rather than waiting politely to make eye contact, you just throw
Yeah.
your hand up in the air and you go, "Fuyan," like waiter or waitress. And it was, it's not an impolite thing. People see that in China, they think it's impolite. It's just it's a cultural thing
Yeah,
that you have
exactly.
to adapt to. And for me, I loved that. So I remember putting on my WeChat account on my moments, like my news feed for anybody who's not familiar with it, and basically said, does anybody have any friends or anybody that they know who's Chinese who lives around by Birmingham? So my hometown is nearby Birmingham in the UK, which is where I'd returned to. And someone said, "Yes, I have a friend who's just moved there. Actually, he just graduated from a university in Wales in Cardiff, and is now living in Birmingham. Do you want to meet up?" And I said, "Sure." So I met up with this guy. His name is River. And the very first time I met up with River, he was telling me about this idea that he had randomly to start this marketing agency. And I said to him, like, my gosh, well, I've literally just been doing all of this stuff. This is, yeah, he hadn't had much work experience himself at this point. It was just fresh out of uni and, thinking about these things. I'd got a couple of years worth of experience, obviously, doing this now under my belt. And so, yeah, we ended up going full gung ho. He had another friend from university who he knew from like the Young Enterprise like society
Mhm.
at university where they'd worked on some projects together. And so he was like, "Do you want, maybe this other guy can join us as well?" I was like, "Sure, why not? Three Musketeers, let's do it." And they are still my business partners to this very day. So
And
it
this was about
was,
10 years ago, roughly.
yeah, yeah, this is like 10 years ago now. So
So do you still
it,
remember the coffee shop where you met up?
I do. Well, we met out at I always found it really funny, and I don't think I've ever actually told this story publicly before. Um, but I always remember he said to me, like, "Oh, let's meet at so in Birmingham, in the city centre, they have a cathedral, which is not the biggest or most glamorous of cathedrals. It's like a tiny church, actually, but it grants Birmingham its status as a city because
Okay.
you need to have a cathedral in the UK for it to be a city." And And so we met at the park area around this cathedral. And I was like, I mean, it's a very busy area. So it's right in the center of Birmingham. And I always remember saying to him afterwards, like, why are we meeting, post us meeting up? I said, why not did we meet at a park? I said, I wanted to meet at the coffee shop there. And he was like, oh, well, I wanted to make sure you weren't going to kill me. And I said, well, I wouldn't have killed you in a coffee shop either. like, there was CCTV in the coffee shop. To be honest, I would have felt safer in the coffee shop rather than meeting in a park. So, very random. And so that's basically how it all got started. So we met up
I
at
mean,
this.
you are ultimately a founder. You came
Yes.
together with three guys. I'm assuming the other two are mainland Chinese.
One is Chinese. One is Croatian, actually.
Oh,
So from Eastern
So
Europe.
the three
Yeah.
of you, completely different cultures,
Yep.
backgrounds, and all that, and you've come together as co-founders to build this business over the last 10 years. Um, there must have been challenges along the way.
Oh gosh.
And I think, the whole point of this podcast is how did we thrive in China? How did we overcome the challenges that existed? My biggest question is I always think, you know, three co-founders, three sets of ideas. How did you get around compromising? How did you get around pushing, growing and scaling the business when you have two other people to make decisions with and you kind of need their agreement to do stuff? I'm just curious on really the dynamic of the three of you, and how
Yeah.
you're still running it together.
I know for sure. I mean, I know at the beginning, there was a great sense of camaraderie with this. I think you're living predominantly just off like enthusiasm
Right.
and a desire to try and make something work. We knew that there was an open opportunity for this because we wanted to specialize in introducing Western-based businesses to Chinese audiences because it was an area where I had obviously a background in, I had experience in this stuff. And River himself, was Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Tony, ironically enough, had absolutely no idea about either of about China, about business. He was coming into this super fresh, but with a lot of enthusiasm and a desire to make something work. And I think that helped a lot actually, because I think out of the three of us, I would say that me and River are probably the two more opinionated ones. And
Okay.
then Tony can kind of be the mediator
Okay.
between the two of us from time to time. And I think that's actually been one of the recipes for our success as well, is that we've always kind of had those three people decision making processes. So there's always a majority that's agreeing with something. If there's just two of you and you're both firmly set in how you believe something should be done, well,
Mm.
how do you come to a compromise on that? Because you're
So
both
the third arm helps actually to mediate and create a compromise, right? To
for
keep
sure, for
a
sure.
neutrality, I guess, between.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like politics almost. You're kind of playing politics a little bit with stuff like this. But it always means that any decision that's being made is being made by the majority of the people
Right.
who run and own the company. And I think there was a lot of benefit actually in that process.
Yeah.
Of course, there's going to be plenty of tension along the way. You're going to make I think we made every single possible mistake that you can make. If there was a book called Startup Mistakes 101, I think we made every single one of those. But we're proof that you can make mistakes and you can learn from those mistakes and you can become stronger from it. You don't have to give up on something. You can still persevere and challenge your way through those difficult times. So yeah.
So give me one of the top mistakes from the book of 101 mistakes that you've made.
Well, I always say this to people right now as well, which is when you're starting the company up, always make sure that you assign roles and responsibilities. It's very easy and it's sometimes a bit silly to start building a structure when in the bank account there's maybe a negative value because you've just spent £20 on business cards or something.
Right.
Or you're constantly going to the coffee shop, so you've spent $30-40 in New York City, you've spent $10 per coffee.
Right.
So at the beginning, it sounds very trivial to say, who's going to be CEO, for example, who's going to be, a CFO, and how are we going to start organizing and breaking this stuff down? And when we're sat there in a Starbucks, um, just trying to build a service, even it sounds very, very silly, but these become real issues later on. Because when all of a sudden you actually are becoming successful now, well, everybody is almost of the opinion, well, we're all equal, we're all CEOs, and I'm like, well, that's a lot of chefs. Imagine three head chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It
Stepping on
it
each other's toes, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
You're providing different directions to people. You've got different ideas on how things should be done and things like that. So
But I also think, I mean, tell me if you had this experience as well. I think it's also a matter of, as co-founders, it's also a matter of admitting what are your strengths and your weaknesses.
for sure.
Not everyone is suitable to be a CEO.
Right.
Not everyone is a numbers guy and should be a CFO,
Sure. Yeah,
right?
I mean, I shouldn't be CFO. I'm terrible with numbers. People always say to me, Jimmy, you don't look stressed. And I'm like, that's because I don't deal with the finances. So Tony, he's very stressed. um, no, it is, people should recognize where their strengths are. I think that again, sometimes though, people have the opinion that they are good at something when they might
Mm,
not actually be that great at something, but they
right.
wholeheartedly believe it. We've all met those friends
Yeah, yeah.
who believe that they are great singers, and you hear them sing and you're like, oh God, like
Yes.
they actually think that they're good at this. And you kind of think to yourself, like, how do they think that they're good at it? They must know the reality, but
They
they
don't.
don't.
Yeah.
And that carries through to business as well. You meet those same individuals, and I'm not saying that we necessarily have those kinds of issues and problems, but people do believe that they're good at something when actually they're not.
Right.
And that's where again you can sometimes enter into different tensions and have different issues and problems. The way to resolve it is just communication. I think people have a tendency when stuff like this happens and you have a little bit of a disagreement on something, to kind of put the walls up, say, I
Mm,
can't work with this person, that's
I
it,
give up.
I give up, that's it,
Yeah.
done. And that's why most businesses fail. When you look at the reasons of why a lot of businesses at the very beginning stages fail, it is because of that. It's
Mm,
normally just down to disagreements that they could not resolve.
mm,
And for us, we were quite good at resolving this. We would make sure that every single Monday we would have a meeting where we would address any issues or concerns. If there were tensions or issues, we tried to make sure that we could address those. We always did it as a three rather than
mm,
trying to do something as a two.
right.
And I think that helped a lot as well, because if there's two of
No one,
you who have,
no one also feels like they're being backstabbed, right? No one, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
as a three
exactly.
constantly, it's you're not ganging up on the other person, right?
Yeah, yeah, there's not, there aren't whispers going on where you're
Right.
trying to get one person on your side so you can go and attack that's not really the way things are done. It's an open dialogue and an open discussion. Something which, we still do to this very day.
Mm,
There's not really any topic that we won't discuss.
mm.
And I think that has helped quite a lot, actually. And it's helped even more by being further away, because it means that we now formalize those processes a lot more. So we have a structured way in which we go about addressing these things, and that served us very well going
So
forwards.
where are all three of you based? I mean, I
So
know you're in New York, but
I'm based in New York, despite my accent, and River's based in Birmingham in the
okay,
UK, which is where we started the business, and we still have an office in Birmingham. We have 4 offices now. And Tony is based between Birmingham and London,
okay,
so he
okay,
jumps kind of between the two.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I'm curious. I mean, you have built a business centered on helping Western brands market themselves in China.
Hmm.
What's funny though is that you didn't build this business in China. You built
Right.
this business in the UK
Yep.
and then expanded it from there. So, I mean, ultimately, I guess if I would, I mean, as an outsider, I'm thinking, okay, you started off first getting the clients and then started doing the service. Um, Is that fair to say?
Oh, for sure. So we've never had funding. So there's not been like a cash injection behind this. We didn't go down, the route of trying to get investment or anything like that. The entire operation, the company was bootstrapped, and to this day, it still is. We still fully own the company. We still
Mm.
don't have investors or anything like that. It was, with oh my gosh, sorry. You know what? The questions just completely jumped out of my head. Could you repeat the question again?
So
That's
you started off with getting clients first,
Oh, yes, yes,
or
yes, that was it. Sorry.
actually, yeah.
So it's 9 a.m. I need more caffeine, stronger caffeine, I think. So we started out by getting clients was the most important thing for us. So what we set out to do at the very, very beginning was every single day we would attend a networking event. We would attend absolutely every event that was going. It didn't matter what kind of event it was, we would be there. All three of us would be there. I used to set like a challenge for us, which is whoever can collect the most business cards at the end of the night gets to drink for free afterwards. The other ones have got to pick up the tab. So, we used to set things like that to try and make it a little bit of a game, because
Yeah,
networking is terrible when you're a startup.
yeah.
People, have a great tendency to look down on you,
Also
to
because I think you're desperate. And although it might not seem on the outside that you're desperate, internally, you're desperate to build
oh,
the business and to win clients and, you know,
for sure, for sure. I mean, I do, and I can sympathize a little bit with that, because I still encounter people, I guess, who come across a little bit over
yeah,
enthusiastic, and I'm sure that's how we came off maybe at that time as well. And it's challenging. People they dismiss you, they don't want to talk to you, and especially when you actually have an opportunity to speak to somebody who you think would be a great client. You see a brand that all of a sudden the marketing manager for this brand is stood right in front of you, and you're like, my God, this is amazing. Like, this is the deal that I need. And so you go up to them very enthusiastic, and you're introducing your business and stuff, and no one's ever heard of you, of course. So that,
right.
you get an eye. I'll always remember one event that I attended. And again, I don't know if I've ever said, there's lots of firsts here, because I don't think I've ever mentioned this publicly either. But at this event, I won't name names, but there was a very well-known brand, and I went up to the marketing manager for this brand and kind of introduced what it is that we do and stuff like that. And I'm like talking away to her, and she's looking at me, but all of a sudden she sees somebody that she knows, and immediately she just calls out that person's name and just walks over to them. I was mid-sentence. I
No.
hadn't even finished speaking. So I had just been completely blanked, completely ignored. And she just walked away and went to speak to the person that she
No.
knew without
Jimmy, we
saying
all have
anything.
our stories.
Yeah, and it's tough, dealing with that. You're like, oh, internally, you
Yeah.
kind of you're angry, you're frustrated, you kind of want to cry.
And a piece of
Um,
you dies. And
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to have to deal with, and I think having my business partners was really useful at that point, because I had someone that I could go over to and said, "My God, I just had the worst conversation.
absolutely.
I need a glass of wine. Let's go find the bar."
So I didn't have that in Shanghai myself, but I had a network of friends and that was the beauty of in those days, China and all of that. Everybody was spontaneous. You had a bad day, you called a friend. Are we going to meet downtown for a drink? Yes,
Yeah.
we meet downtown
Yes.
for a drink.
For sure. I still do
And
that
you
to this
let it
very day.
out.
Yeah, I still do that to this very day. My friends know if I text them saying I need a drink, something's happened.
So, so I'm curious then. I mean, obviously, you eventually got the clients, right? So, how did you build the China side? I mean, how did you do the service delivery side?
Yeah,
Um, and you did that remote, you built that remotely, I'm guessing, or did you go back
yeah.
to China, or how did you
Well,
build that?
yeah. So, I mean, luckily for us, we were focused on digital. So, digital kind of means that we could service that, from within, from
Okay.
anywhere. And we had River, who was our Chinese speaker.
Hmm.
So he, at the beginning, was any client that we got, he was the one creating all the content for them, posting it. He was doing all of that stuff. He created like an influencer account for me. And at one point in China, I was like a mini micro influencer. I used to get invited to go on like TV shows and the stuff that I
That's
actually
pretty cool.
never went through with any of that stuff, to the disappointment, I would say, of a few of my friends who desperately wanted me to be on TV. but he would do all of that stuff. So we still had the capabilities to be able
Right.
to service something because we were a digital based business. We could really do that from anywhere in the world, and we didn't really have that much of an issue. And plus, our clients were predominantly Western based, so our clients were, initially our very first client was based in Birmingham. So
And I guess that's an advantage because you were there, you could sit right next to them
yes,
to develop the content, right? But
absolutely.
but I'm guessing at a certain point you needed to have a team on the ground.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah, because as you begin to grow and expand, you realize that you can't, just operate even out of like a Starbucks in Birmingham.
Right.
Again, we thought it was super cool that we were just in Starbucks and that was our office. We were like, wow, we're so, very
Modern.
millennial of us, and which would now be Gen Z, I guess. Whatever Gen Z is doing, it's the cool thing to be doing.
Yeah.
Um, and again, we were I remember one client asked us before, they said, "Oh, where is your office?" When we're actually presenting to them in person. And we said, like, "Oh, the Starbucks in Birmingham down the road," kind of thing. And the look that they gave us was just like, "You guys are not professional. Like, no, this meeting's over. That's it." And at that point, we realized that we need to start to take things a little bit more seriously. And as we begin to get more clients, they kind of want to make sure that we have a presence that's
Right.
somewhere of significance and relevance to them. So our first office was to expand out into London, make sure that we had an operation in London as well. We didn't want to be too London centric as a business. We wanted to make sure that we could service the entirety of the UK. And for anyone who's familiar with the geography there, one of the issues sometimes is the businesses are too London centric and they forget the rest of the UK. It's
Right.
like, in the US, only being,
Then it also
East
means
Coast focused.
prices go up because you are London centric as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the cost of doing business now is becoming a lot more
Right.
expensive, and
Right.
clients sometimes complain why your price is increasing, and I'm like, well, we were probably way too cheap before,
Right. Right.
so now we're just trying to we're matching pricing that actually
Right.
makes sense to run a real business. The next natural step, of course, was to open an office in Shanghai. We did that because we were getting bigger clients that often had offices and teams out in Shanghai, and we needed to be able to communicate with them. So we needed kind of boots on the ground there, so that as and when there was an issue, a problem, or they just wanted to meet up in person, we could say we do have people out there who can,
So would you
address
say that was your
issues.
main trigger? I mean, the clients having their own subsidiaries in China was a
Yeah.
trigger for you to say,
Yes.
okay, now the quantity of clients we have who have a local office, it makes sense that we have somebody on the ground initially and then build off on that team as it
Yeah,
grows.
yeah, yeah, for sure. That was the main thing. I think if we didn't need that, we probably would not have actually bothered necessarily with the China office. There were some other advantages as well. Having a China business license allowed us to be able to do some of the advertising campaigns that a foreign business was not permitted to do. We were registered, and we still are registered. We have a registered legal entity in China that's wholly owned by the British entity, that has permission, obviously, to be able to run ad campaigns
Right,
in mainland China.
right.
A lot of people are not familiar with all the complexities when it comes to the legal framework. I'm sure you are, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of complexities when it comes to this. So for us, we needed that business entity
And
and that
have that
license as well.
flexibility to do more services for the client as well.
Yeah. So that was really important also. So we ended up doing that. And then our New York office was set up basically for the same reason as mentioned. We started getting some US based businesses and or clients. And we realized quite quickly, I guess, that in the US in particular, they wanted to work with US businesses. So they wanted to make sure the contracts, for example, if there's a dispute, it can't be settled in a court in England.
Mm,
It needs to be settled in a court in New York State.
yeah.
And clients didn't like our contracts, our British contracts, or having to deal sometimes even just with sending money overseas, because a lot of businesses in the US still send checks when they're settling invoices, which to me is just, even to this day,
Old fashioned, right? Yeah.
I find this mind-boggling that
Isn't
checks
it
even
funny? You've got
exist.
WeChat Pay, Alipay on one end, and then you have checks on the other.
it's a whole different world.
Yeah,
And so we had to do that. So, for us, when we're looking at different markets, when we're entering into different markets, we had to assess whether or not we needed like a legal entity and to
right.
localize even our own business to those particular markets so that we could also best serve them. And so that's what we've spent a lot of time and energy doing over the years as well.
So I'm going to drift on a different question, and I'm going to ask you something that I know you can't answer, but it is on the top of every single client's mind. Every company that I meet with is obviously looking at a marketing strategy or branding strategy for China.
Yep.
And when they're in this market entry phase of startup, right? So growing the business, they want the magic number.
Mm-hmm.
What is this magic number that I get to spend on marketing, right? And we all know, I mean, no, that's not true. We don't all know. I know, you know, there is no magic number.
Yep.
But I'm not a marketeer. I'm not a branding strategist. I'm nothing like that. How do you answer clients who are so fixated on this magic number? I mean, that for me would be one of the biggest takeaways from today, because it's not a question can answer. I'm not
Yep.
in this world. Um, and it's such a valuable the answer is so valuable, because in the end of the day, this is what green lights a project for China,
Yeah.
or can actually push you back and say, no, we've got to wait a few more years, because actually the revenue we're earning doesn't warrant us spending this much on branding and marketing. So, you're in these pitches more than I am, Jimmy. How do you approach this type of a question?
It's always such a hard question to answer because everyone always says that. So, what's the minimum spend that I need to be spending in order to make China, a success for us? And there's so many factors that enter into that conversation. Do you already have a presence in China? Are you well known? Are you organically known, even if you're not doing anything there? Up to this date, it's almost like saying, I want to buy a car. Okay, that's great. Well, what budget do you have for a car? Because if you're asking me the price of a car, I can tell you a lot of different prices for different cars, but they're all going to serve different purposes.
Right.
Do you want something that's going to break down on you?
Do you need a city car or four-wheel drive? Do you need baby car seats in the back or not?
Yes, so many factors.
Yeah.
And so I try and push the question back onto the client. And I said, well, what are you expecting to get out of the market? So, what are your goals and objectives with China? Because based on what your goals and objectives are, and importantly, what the timeline is for your goals and objectives, then I can start to make different recommendations. When people come to me, I guess, and say, hey, I've got $5,000 for China. I'm like, great. So you've got $5,000 to reach 1/5 of the world's internet population with the biggest middle class in the entire world, and covering a geographic area the size of Europe. I don't think $5,000 is going to go very far. um, and
Don't make them
time.
feel dumb.
It's I but sometimes it's the question itself. I need that cold iced water splash of reality sometimes because people need to realize that China is not a cheap market. People think, oh, China, everything's manufactured there. It must be really cheap out there because that's why everything's made there.
I mean, this is the perception that everybody still has, and we're in 2023. I think people need to realize
Yes,
China has gotten expensive. If you look at
yes,
the real estate market, if you look at salaries, if you look
yes.
I mean, listen, when I arrived in Shanghai in 2003, the entry fee in a cab was 8 kwai, so 8 RMB. Okay. What is it today? I mean, that's inflation, right? Over
Yep,
20 years. Um, Things have just gotten more expensive. You go to a basic restaurant, the cost of food has gone up. And since the Shanghai lockdowns, that hasn't even changed. I mean, things have gotten even
yeah,
more expensive since COVID,
yes,
and people have to cover this cost,
yeah.
right?
It's not a cheap market at all.
Yeah.
And it's this illusion, I guess, that people. I mean, sure, if you go to the middle of nowhere in China, it's probably going to be super cheap. But it's the same in the US.
So I mean, when you say super cheap, I actually think we're talking about the super cheap of Shanghai 20 years ago. It's still not super cheap like it used to be
Oh, oh yeah,
30,
no,
40 years
absolutely
ago,
not, for
right?
sure. I mean, China, Shanghai is still always going to be very expensive,
Yeah.
and Shanghai is a
Beijing
huge,
too.
big.
I mean, I mean,
Beijing as well.
global.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's people often forget, the size of a small city in China is a city that has 1 million people. That's
Mm.
a small city. And in most other countries, that's a pretty large city.
Yeah.
Most other countries, that's probably going to be your second. In the UK, it's Birmingham, right? Birmingham has just over 1 million people. It's the second largest city in the UK. It's wild. In China, that's a small city.
Yeah.
So the size of the country itself means that if you're wanting to enter into this market, it is going to require some investment. Chinese consumers are not just going to see a foreign product and go, my gosh, this foreign product, I must have it. Those days are long gone.
Mm.
You're now competing not only with the local brands in China, you're not only competing with the other local brands in your home market, you're also competing with brands that you've never heard of that are coming out of South Korea, that are coming out of Japan, that are coming out of these other markets that are valued. Those brand names are valued in China, but we've never heard of them before.
Mm.
And because of that, the competition is quite great. Does that mean that you shouldn't do China? Of course not. China and the East Asia in general is where the next 10 years is going to be. And regardless of what we hear in the media, the future is still going to be there. It is too big essentially to fail. And I know people said that about Enron. Not a great example. But it genuinely is such a large country. It is so important. And when you do have 1/5 of the world's internet population, people have to realize that it does require investment to go into this marketplace. So I wish I could give a simple number there. The analogy just goes back to what's the price of a car? Again, you can get a cheap car, but it's probably going to break down on you. It's not going to serve you very well. If you want to invest properly in a car that's actually going to serve you well, do what you need it to do, and also last, then you've got to spend.
More. Right.
You've got to spend more money. It's just
Right.
as simple as it is.
Do you
Yeah,
think
there is.
it's fair enough to say, and I'm trying to get your confirmation on this, that 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 nobody in China is an overnight success? Because you were talking about timeline, right? You were saying, what are your
Yeah,
goals and objectives? What do you want to achieve? And what's your timeline in this? So I think it's also important to clarify, nobody is an overnight success.
yeah, no.
Right?
These overnight successes, I guess, that people hear about, right? You hear about like Mini Cooper or something selling out of all of their cars in like 2 minutes or something, and all of these kinds of things. And these are not things that happen by luck or by fluke. The majority of times, these are things that had a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes to make
Exactly.
this a success.
A lot of strategy, a lot
For
of
sure. And
research, planning, budget. I mean, everything was planned behind those
For sure.
things.
And I'm
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's going to be the odd brand that sometimes does have that overnight success story. Is that something that we can make happen? No. If I could make that happen, I would be talking to you right now on a desert island somewhere because I'd have done it all myself. The reality is that it requires, real investment into the market in order to actually start to yield some kind of significant results from this market. Chinese consumers are not stupid. They are very well informed, very well educated. And so you need to have a level of respect for the consumer when you're entering the marketplace. And that requires some investment.
Um, so I want to finish off. I mean, we could talk for hours, but we have to stop at some point. Um,
Sadly.
I always finish off the podcast with the same question to everybody. Jimmy, you've lived in China. You got brought over there by accident. I mean, was it
Yeah.
intended that you go over there? So I'm curious, can you give yourself, what is the one piece of advice you would give yourself on the first day that you arrived in Beijing?
So for this, I've asked myself the same question actually quite a few times, and there are a few things or regrets, I guess, that I've had about my time in China. I would revisit and do everything all over again, but there's some things I think I could do better. And the one thing that I think I should have done more than anything else, or maybe not done, is just never be afraid to lose face.
Mm.
So never be afraid to put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to use the language. Don't be shy or scared of doing things out there because it's the only way that you can grow and learn in China. Don't be scared of trying to make Chinese friends, hang out with them, and only speak Chinese to them. I was scared to do that because I didn't want to look stupid. And it's the one regret I think that I've gotten. It's the one thing that if I could mention it to, give that recommendation to anybody who'll go back in time, it would be, don't be afraid to lose face. Don't be afraid to look stupid. Just do it.
I love that advice. I'm not trying to debate it. I just know myself. When I arrived in Shanghai, which I still can't believe that my father, who at that time was my boss, was pushing me to do it. I was 22 years old, so I was a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, newly graduated. Although I come back and say, I wish I had gumption. I wish I had the guts to do everything that you just said. Go out with Chinese people, go out with my colleagues, do this, do that. At 22, just wanted to go out with foreign friends. That was all I wanted to do. I wanted to be in a safe space.
Yeah.
It was already such an adventure back then that I was like, oh, that's now another level of adventure.
Yeah.
But I was also really young, right? That I don't think always I could have done it. But I do know, because borders have opened up. I want people to realize that whether you are 22, newly graduated, or whether you are 45 and being asked to relocate, I totally agree with Jimmy. Go out and immerse yourself in the culture. Those that didn't ended up, at least from my group of friends, ended up hating China.
Yeah.
And disliking every aspect of it. And every aspect in their personal life, every aspect in their professional life, to the point that when they left, now a lot of them don't even want to go back.
Yeah.
They left with a bad taste in their mouth or disgust. I left China not because I wanted to. I left for COVID circumstances, and I want to go back. I when I go on a business trip, I enjoy immersing myself in the culture and in the environment. And the best is when you are the only white person on a Chinese table, and you're having Chinese food, and they're like, try this, try that, and you're like, I'm not even going to ask what it is. I'm just going to try.
Yes.
Right?
That's it. You just got to go for it.
Go, exactly. And also in meetings, I mean, I agree with you, Jimmy. Don't have a fear of losing face. I mean, the whole point of doing business in China is being brash, being direct. The Chinese are direct as well. So why not be direct back and counter them? It's fun negotiating with them. Enjoy the process. Is usually
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Don't be shy.
Yeah. What is a last tip that you can offer to everybody?
Oh gosh. I think outside of I think one of the biggest things, I'll do like a general business one as well, which is we often believe that the quality of what we do will oftentimes just speak for itself. That's not always the case. Talk about your achievements, talk about the successes that you have, make sure that you communicate those things, because you might be the best at what you do in the whole wide world, but if you don't let people know, no one's going to ever know. Exactly. So don't just rely on the quality of the work that you're doing. Make sure that you communicate this quality constantly. And we all struggle doing this sometimes. Make sure you do that.
Well, I think that's the whole point of this podcast, is actually to share with people who are interested in doing business in China, share the experience, and highlight the experts that have gone through it and their successes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been around for 20 years. You've been around for over 10 years in this market, developing, pivoting, scaling, and we're still around, right? And we still have smiles on our face.
Exactly. Our ships are still sailing. So
yeah. And as I hope many of you can hear or even see on the YouTube channel, is, we still have a passion for it. And I think that's the most important part, right?
Absolutely.
It's what keeps us going. Well, Jimmy, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I'm going to provide everybody with your email address, the details of PingPong Digital in the show notes, so that if anybody's got any questions about what you do or wants to have a chat, they can reach out to you as well.
Amazing. Look forward to it.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Take care and bye.